I never thought that at 65 years old, working part-time at Henderson and Associates accounting firm would become a nightmare. What started as my peaceful transition into semi-retirement has turned into the most humiliating experience of my career. Every morning, I'd arrive at my desk to find my computer acting strange, my carefully prepared reports filled with bizarre formatting errors, and my professional reputation crumbling before my eyes. This story will shock you, so make sure to like and subscribe for more. Drop a comment with your city name. My name is Elena Gomez. I'm 65 years old, and I've been working in accounting for over 40 years. I thought I'd seen everything, but nothing prepared me for what my coworker Derek Morrison has been doing to me. Derek is 38, ambitious, and apparently threatened by the fact that despite my age, clients still prefer my meticulous work over his flashy presentations. He joined our small firm 2 years ago, and at first, I was the one showing him the ropes, sharing decades of experience with someone I thought was genuinely grateful. The problem started subtly about 6 months ago. My computer would freeze during important presentations. Documents I'd saved perfectly would open with ridiculous fonts like Comic Sans instead of the professional Times New Roman I always used. Decimal points would mysteriously shift in spreadsheets, making my calculations look sloppy and amateurish. At first, I blamed technology, joking about being an old woman struggling with modern computers. But the errors became too specific, too perfectly timed to be coincidental. They happened right before big client meetings, always when Derek was nearby, and always in ways that made me look incompetent rather than just unlucky. My heart would race every morning as I turned on my computer, wondering what humiliation awaited me today. Last Tuesday was the breaking point. I was presenting quarterly reports to our biggest client, Meridian Construction, when my PowerPoint slides suddenly displayed juvenile clip art of dancing cartoon characters instead of professional charts. The client looked confused, then annoyed, as I frantically clicked through slides showing bouncing puppies where profit margins should have been. Derek jumped in smoothly, apologizing for my technical difficulties, and producing his own backup presentation that saved the meeting, but made me look like a bumbling old fool. That evening, I drove home to my small ranch house, feeling defeated and suspicious. My husband, Carlos, was in his workshop, as usual, tinkering with old car engines that he restores as a hobby. Carlos Gomez and I have been married for 43 years, and he's always been my anchor when work stress overwhelmed me. At 70, he's got the patience of a saint and the practical wisdom that comes from decades of managing his own auto repair shop before retiring. "Rough day, mija?" he asked, looking up from a carburetor he was cleaning. His weathered hands were gentle as he wiped them on an old rag, giving me his full attention the way he always did. I found myself pouring out everything, all my suspicions about Derek, all my fears that maybe I really was too old for this job. Maybe technology had finally outpaced my abilities. Carlos listened without interrupting, his dark eyes serious behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Elena, in 40 years of marriage, I've never known you to make careless mistakes," he said firmly. "Something's not right here. You need to trust your instincts." His words gave me courage, but I still felt lost about what to do next. That's when I remembered my friend Janet Rodriguez, who worked in IT support for the county courthouse. Janet and I had been friends since our kids played Little League together 25 years ago. She was only 52, sharp as a tack with computers, and had always been protective of people she cared about. I called Janet that night, explaining my situation while pacing our kitchen as Carlos made chamomile tea. Janet's voice grew angry as I described the pattern of computer problems. "Elena, what you're describing sounds like someone with access to your computer is deliberately sabotaging your files," she said bluntly. "This isn't user error or bad luck. Someone is messing with your work on purpose." My stomach dropped as she confirmed my worst fears. Janet agreed to help me figure out what was happening, but warned me that proving it would require careful documentation and possibly confronting Derek directly. The thought terrified me. What if I was wrong? What if I accused him and it backfired, costing me my job entirely? But as I lay in bed that night, listening to Carlos's steady breathing beside me, I knew I couldn't let Derek destroy the professional reputation I'd spent 4 decades building. I'd survived workplace discrimination when women in accounting were rare. I'd adapted to computerization when many of my peers retired rather than learn new systems, and I'd proven my worth countless times over the years. I started paying closer attention to Derek's behavior, documenting every computer problem with dates and times. He had a habit of staying late, often mentioning how he'd seen my computer still logged in when he left. He'd offer to help me with technical issues in a patronizing tone that made my skin crawl, always with that concerned expression that fooled everyone else but looked calculating to me. The worst part was feeling isolated and paranoid. Our office manager, Susan, clearly saw me as the problem, making comments about keeping up with modern technology and suggesting I might benefit from basic computer classes. Even longtime clients started requesting Derek for their accounts, obviously losing confidence in my abilities. 3 weeks of careful observation confirmed my suspicions. Derek made excuses to walk past my desk whenever I stepped away, even for a few minutes. He volunteered to help with computer issues before I even mentioned having them. Most telling, he'd developed an uncanny ability to save meetings with backup materials that were suspiciously well prepared, as if he knew problems were coming. One small detail blew the whole thing open. I had forgotten my reading glasses at my desk and returned to the office around 7:30 that evening to retrieve them. The building was mostly dark, but I could see light coming from our accounting department. My heart hammered as I quietly approached, staying in the shadows of the hallway. There was Derek, sitting at my computer, his fingers moving rapidly across my keyboard. The blue glow of my monitor illuminated his face as he scrolled through what looked like my client files. I watched in horrified fascination as he opened a spreadsheet I'd been working on for Morrison Industries, one of our biggest accounts. He made several small changes, altering formulas and moving decimal points. The modifications were subtle enough that they wouldn't be immediately obvious, but would make my final calculations completely wrong. My hands trembled as I fumbled for my phone, managing to take several photos of Derek at my computer. The camera flash was off, but each click of the shutter sounded deafening to my ears. After what felt like an eternity, Derek logged off my computer and gathered his things. I pressed myself against the wall, holding my breath until I heard the elevator doors close. The drive home was a blur. I burst through our front door, startling Carlos, who was watching the late news in his recliner. "Elena, what happened? You look like you've seen a ghost." "I caught him," I said, my voice shaking. "I actually caught Derek sabotaging my files." I showed Carlos the photos on my phone, explaining what I'd witnessed. Carlos studied the images, his expression growing dark. "This is criminal, Elena. You need to report this immediately." "But what if they don't believe me? Derek is so charming, so convincing. And I'm just the old lady who can't handle computers." Carlos took my hands in his. "You're not old, and you're certainly not helpless. You caught him red-handed, that's evidence." The next morning, I arrived at the office early, my stomach churning with anxiety. I'd barely settled at my desk when Derek strolled in, coffee in hand, wearing that familiar, concerned smile. "Good morning, Elena. How are those Morrison Industries reports coming along? I know you've been struggling with the numbers." The audacity of his question made my blood boil. He was setting me up, already knowing the files were corrupted. Actually, Derek, I need to speak with you about something important. His smile faltered slightly. Of course. What can I help you with? I pulled out my phone and showed him the photos. The color drained from Derek's face as he stared at the images of himself at my computer. I think you know exactly what these pictures show, I said quietly, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Derek's charming facade cracked completely. His eyes darted around the office, confirming we were alone. Elena, I can explain. It's not what it looks like. Really? Because it looks like you've been deliberately sabotaging my work to make me appear incompetent. You don't understand the pressure I'm under, Derek said, his voice becoming desperate. I have a mortgage, kids heading to college. This company needs fresh blood, not people who should have retired years ago. His words stung, but they also revealed the ugly truth behind his actions. So you decided to destroy my reputation to advance your own career? I never meant for it to go this far. At first, it was just small things, thinking maybe you'd get frustrated and decide to retire on your own. But you kept fighting, kept adapting. The admission hung between us like a toxic cloud. Janet chose that moment to arrive, taking in the tense scene immediately. Everything all right here? She asked, her sharp eyes moving between Derek and me. Actually, Janet, I was hoping you could help me with something, I said, showing her the photos and briefly explaining what I'd discovered. Janet's expression hardened as she looked at Derek. You've been sabotaging Elena's computer? That's not just unprofessional, it's potentially illegal. Derek's shoulders sagged in defeat. Look, can we work something out here? I'll stop. I'll even help fix the files I've modified. But please don't make this into a bigger issue than it needs to be. A bigger issue? I felt decades of suppressed frustration bubbling to the surface. You've been systematically destroying my professional reputation for months. You've made me question my own abilities, my own sanity. Elena's right, Janet said firmly. This goes beyond workplace politics. This is sabotage, pure and simple. Derek looked between us, realizing his charm and manipulation tactics weren't going to work. What do you want from me? Before I could answer, we heard footsteps in the hallway. Susan's voice carried as she spoke to someone on her phone about reviewing my performance and possibly suggesting early retirement. My heart sank as I realized Derek's sabotage had worked better than he'd probably hoped. Even with proof of his actions, the damage to my reputation might already be irreversible. But then something unexpected happened. Janet stepped closer to Derek, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You need to understand something. Elena has been carrying this department while you've been playing games. The reports you've been sabotaging? They're the foundation of our quarterly assessments. I watched Derek's face pale as the full scope of his actions began to sink in. For months, I'd internalized every glitch, every formatting error, every mysterious file corruption as evidence of my declining abilities. The weight of self-doubt had been crushing, making me question whether I really was becoming obsolete in a digital world that seemed to move faster each day. The presentation last month? I said slowly, the pieces clicking into place. When all my charts turned into garbled text right before the client meeting, that was you. Derek nodded miserably. I thought if you looked incompetent in front of Morrison Industries, Susan would reassign the account to me. The memory of that humiliation washed over me fresh. Standing in front of 12 executives, frantically clicking through slides that displayed nothing but digital gibberish, while apologizing profusely for technical difficulties I couldn't explain. The polite but disappointed looks. The way the room seemed to collectively write me off as another aging employee who couldn't keep up with modern technology. "Do you have any idea what you've done to me?" The words came out rougher than I intended. I've been going home every night wondering if I'm losing my mind, questioning whether I should just give up and retire, because maybe everyone else was right about me being too old for this job. Janet placed a protective hand on my shoulder. "Elena, you're one of the most thorough analysts we have. I've always wondered why your presentations kept having technical issues when your written work was flawless." Derek shifted uncomfortably. "Look, I know it sounds bad, but the pressure to perform in this company is insane. They keep talking about streamlining, about bringing in younger talent. I have 2 kids who want to go to college, and my wife just got laid off from her job. I couldn't afford to be the one pushed out." "So you decided I should be pushed out instead?" I felt something hardening inside my chest, a resolve I hadn't accessed in years. "You decided that my 30 years of experience, my relationships with clients, my knowledge of industry trends, all of that was worthless compared to your ambition?" The approaching footsteps in the hallway grew louder. Susan's voice carried clearly as she discussed my recent performance issues with someone. My stomach clenched as I realized she was probably heading to her office to finalize whatever decision she'd made about my future. But instead of the familiar panic, I felt something else rising within me. Anger. Not the hot, destructive kind, but the cold, purposeful anger that comes from finally understanding you've been wronged. "Janet," I said quietly, "I need you to help me copy these photos to a secure location. And Derek, you're going to help me document every single file you've tampered with." Derek's eyes widened. "Elena, please." "If this gets out, I'll be fired. My family will lose everything." "You should have thought about that before you tried to destroy my career," I replied, surprised by the steel in my own voice. "But I'm not interested in destroying you the way you tried to destroy me. I want to fix this mess and make sure it never happens again." Janet nodded approvingly. "What do you need me to do?" "First, help me create backups of this evidence. Then I need you to be present when I confront Susan about what's really been happening to my work." Derek slumped against his desk. "And what about me?" I studied his face, seeing not the charming manipulator who'd been systematically undermining me, but a scared man who'd made terrible choices out of desperation. The part of me that had been nurturing younger employees for decades wanted to offer compassion, but the part that had been questioning my own sanity for months demanded justice. "That depends," I said finally. "Are you willing to make this right?" Before Derek could answer, Susan's voice grew much closer. She was definitely heading toward our section of the office, and from what I could overhear, she was discussing my recent performance decline and possible transition options. My pulse quickened. In the next few minutes, I would either reclaim my professional reputation or watch it crumble completely based on months of manufactured evidence against me. Janet squeezed my shoulder. "Whatever happens, I'm with you." Derek looked between us, then toward the approaching footsteps, his face a mask of conflict and fear. The sound of Susan's heels on the tile floor grew louder, and I realized she was bringing someone with her. Someone whose voice I recognized but couldn't quite place from this distance. As they rounded the corner into our work area, I straightened my shoulders and prepared for the confrontation that would determine whether my career ended in disgrace or vindication. But when I saw who Susan had brought with her, my carefully planned approach suddenly seemed completely inadequate for what was about to unfold. The person walking beside Susan was Derek's friend from IT support. No, wait. As they got closer, I realized with a sinking heart that it wasn't another employee at all. It was Susan herself, but she was carrying a laptop and had someone on speakerphone. "Elena, perfect timing," Susan called out, her voice carrying that artificially bright tone that always preceded difficult conversations. "I was just discussing your recent project submissions with the quality assurance team." My mouth went dry. The voice on the phone was discussing error rates and consistency issues, using phrases like declining performance metrics and pattern of unprofessional output. Everything Derek had sabotaged was being analyzed and documented as evidence of my incompetence. Janet stepped slightly closer to me, a subtle show of solidarity that gave me strength. Derek had gone completely pale and seemed to be trying to make himself invisible behind his monitor. "Susan," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "Before we discuss those submissions, I need to show you something important." "Elena, I think we need to focus on the immediate concerns first," Susan replied, gesturing for me to sit. "I've been reviewing your work from the past several months, and there are some serious quality issues we need to address." The voice on the phone continued rattling off statistics that painted a picture of systematic professional failure. Each number felt like a nail in the coffin of my career, and the cruel irony was that every single data point was based on Derek's deliberate sabotage. "Please," I said, my voice stronger now. "Give me 5 minutes to explain what's really been happening." Susan's expression softened slightly, perhaps hearing something in my tone that hadn't been there during our previous conversations about my performance. "All right, Elena. 5 minutes." I looked at Derek, who was staring at his hands. "Derek has something he needs to tell you." The color drained completely from Derek's face. "Elena, please don't do this." "You did this," I said firmly. "I'm just asking you to be honest about it." Janet moved to her computer. "I can show you the evidence we found on Elena's machine." Susan looked confused, glancing between the three of us. "What evidence? Elena, what's going on here?" Derek suddenly stood up, his chair rolling backward. "I can't do this. I can't lose my job." "Then you should have thought about that before you started tampering with my files," I said, surprised by how calm I sounded when inside I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff. The voice on Susan's phone was still talking, oblivious to the drama unfolding in our corner of the office. Susan held up her hand and ended the call, her full attention now focused on us. "Someone needs to explain to me what's happening right now," Susan said, her voice carrying the authority that made her an effective manager. "Derek, you look like you're about to be sick." Derek's hands were shaking. I could see him wrestling with himself, torn between self-preservation and doing the right thing. "I made a mistake," Derek said quietly. Derek's admission hung in the air like a physical presence. The word mistake seemed inadequate for months of deliberate sabotage, and I could see Susan processing this revelation while trying to understand the full scope of what was happening. "What kind of mistake, Derek?" Susan asked, her voice carefully controlled. She had shifted into investigation mode, the same tone she used when trying to get to the bottom of project delays or budget discrepancies. Derek looked around desperately, as if searching for an escape route. His eyes landed on Janet, who was standing with her arms crossed, clearly unimpressed with his vague confession. "I changed some things on Elena's computer," Derek said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Some of her files got altered." "Altered how?" Susan pressed. "And by whom?" The silence stretched uncomfortably. I could hear the normal office sounds continuing around us. Keyboards clicking, phones ringing, the hum of the air conditioning. but our little corner felt suspended in time. "By me," Derek finally said, the words coming out in a rush. I altered Elena's files. I changed her work before she submitted it. Susan's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief to something approaching anger. "You tampered with another employee's work? Derek, do you understand what you're telling me?" "It wasn't supposed to go this far," Derek said, his voice cracking slightly. At first it was small things. A typo here, a formatting issue there. I thought maybe it would level the playing field a little." "Level the playing field?" I repeated, finding my voice again. "Derek, you've been systematically destroying my reputation for months." Janet moved closer to her computer screen. "Susan, would you like to see what we found? Elena's been keeping backups of her original work, and when we compared them to what was actually submitted—" "Yes," Susan said immediately. "Show me everything!" Derek sank back into his chair, looking defeated. "I know this looks bad." "This looks bad?" I said, incredulous. "Derek, that phone call Susan just finished was about my supposed incompetence. Every statistic they discussed was based on work you sabotaged." Susan held up her hand, signaling for quiet, while Janet pulled up the comparison files on her screen. The three of us gathered around Janet's monitor as she displayed my original work side by side with the sabotaged versions that had been submitted. The evidence was damning and clear. Professional reports had been turned into documents riddled with errors. Charts had been altered to show incorrect data. My carefully crafted presentations had been transformed into unprofessional messes. "This is extensive," Susan said quietly, scrolling through the examples. "Derek, how long has this been going on?" Derek was staring at his hands again. "About 4 months." 4 months, Susan repeated slowly. "Derek, Elena was almost terminated because of these performance issues. Do you understand that?" I felt a chill run through me. Almost terminated. I had suspected my job was in jeopardy, but hearing Susan confirm it made the reality of what Derek had done hit me with full force. "I know," Derek said miserably. "I know, and I'm sorry. I never wanted it to go that far." "What did you want?" Janet asked sharply. What was the point of all this?" Derek looked up for the first time since his confession began. His face was red, and I could see tears forming in his eyes. "Elena always made everything look so easy. Every project, every deadline, every client meeting. She made the rest of us look incompetent by comparison." The honesty of his admission was almost more shocking than the sabotage itself. I stared at him, trying to reconcile this confession with the colleague I thought I had known. "So your solution was to sabotage her work?" Susan asked. "To make her actually look incompetent?" I thought if her work had some problems, maybe the expectations would be more reasonable for everyone," Derek said. "I thought maybe management would realize that nobody could be perfect all the time." "By making me look like I couldn't do my job at all," I said, the full scope of his reasoning finally becoming clear. Derek nodded miserably. "It escalated. Each time, I told myself it would be the last time. But then there would be another project, another opportunity for you to shine, and You just kept sabotaging her," Janet finished for him. Susan was quiet for a long moment, studying the evidence on Janet's screen. When she finally spoke, her voice was grave. "Derek, I need you to understand something. What you've done isn't just unethical, it's potentially criminal. You've deliberately damaged a colleague's reputation and career through fraudulent means." Derek's face went completely white. "Criminal? Elena could press charges for this," Susan continued. "And frankly, After seeing this evidence, I'm not sure I could blame her if she did. I looked at Derek, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time in months. The colleague who had offered sympathy during my struggles, who had suggested I might be working too hard, who had been so understanding about my sudden performance problems, he had been the architect of all of it. The question now, Susan said, turning to look at me, is how we move forward from here. The silence in the conference room stretched until it felt suffocating. I could hear the hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of phones ringing in other offices. Derek sat slumped in his chair, his confession hanging in the air between us like a toxic cloud. How do we move forward? I repeated Susan's question, tasting the bitterness of it. I don't even know where to begin processing this. Derek looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. Elena, I know I have no right to ask, but please don't press charges. I'll do anything to make this right. Anything? The word came out sharper than I intended. Derek, do you have any idea what these past few months have been like for me? The sleepless nights wondering what was wrong with me? The anxiety attacks before every meeting? The complete destruction of my confidence? I never meant for it to affect you personally, Derek said weakly. I thought you were so confident that a few technical glitches wouldn't really bother you. Janet let out a short, humorless laugh. You thought sabotaging someone's work wouldn't affect them personally? Are you serious right now? I was focused on the work itself, Derek protested. I didn't think about how Elena would feel. That's exactly the problem, Susan interjected. You compartmentalized your actions without considering the human cost. Elena isn't just a work output machine, Derek. She's a person with feelings, a career, a reputation. I stood up abruptly, needing to move, to pace, to do something with the energy coursing through me. I blamed myself, I said, walking to the window and staring out at the parking lot. I thought I was losing my mind. I started questioning every decision I made, every email I sent, every presentation I gave. Elena, Derek started, but I turned around and held up my hand. No, you need to hear this. You need to understand what you actually did to me. My voice was steady now, fueled by months of suppressed frustration. I went home every night feeling like a failure. I stopped volunteering for challenging projects because I was convinced I couldn't handle them. I started avoiding client interactions because I was terrified something would go wrong and make me look incompetent. Derek's face crumpled. I'm so sorry. I really didn't think. You didn't think about me at all, I finished. You saw me as competition to be eliminated, not as a colleague or even as a human being. Susan was taking notes throughout this exchange, her pen scratching across the legal pad in sharp, decisive strokes. Derek, I need to ask you this directly. Are you prepared to provide a written confession detailing exactly what you did and when you did it? Derek nodded without hesitation. Yes, I'll document everything. And you understand that this written confession will become part of your permanent employment record and will likely result in immediate termination? The color drained from Derek's face completely. Termination? What did you expect? Janet asked incredulously. That you'd get a warning and everyone would move on? Susan set down her pen and looked directly at Derek. You deliberately sabotaged a colleague's work over a period of months. You caused significant damage to Elena's professional reputation and nearly cost her job. There have to be consequences. Derek was quiet for a long moment, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. I understand, he said finally. I accept that. But Elena, please, is there anything I can do to help repair the damage I caused? I studied his face, looking for any sign of the manipulation I now knew he was capable of. All I saw was genuine remorse and desperation. "You can start by helping me understand exactly what you did," I said, returning to my seat. "I need to know every instance, every method, every detail. If I'm going to rebuild my reputation here, I need to know the full scope of what I'm working against." Derek straightened slightly, seeming relieved to have a concrete way to help. "I can do that. I kept notes." "You kept notes?" Janet asked, her eyebrows shooting up. "You documented your sabotage?" "I told myself I was tracking how minor problems affected overall project outcomes," Derek said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I was trying to justify what I was doing by treating it like some kind of experiment." The clinical nature of his approach made my stomach turn. "Show me," I said. Derek pulled out his phone and opened a note-taking app. I started with the Morrison presentation in July. I changed the font sizes in 3 slides and altered 2 of the charts to show incorrect data. As he continued reading from his digital record of destruction, I felt Janet's hand briefly touch my shoulder in support. Susan continued taking notes, her expression growing more severe with each revelation. "The Patterson contract," Derek continued. "I modified the delivery timeline and changed some of the pricing structure. For the quarterly budget report, I deleted several formulas in the spreadsheet and changed the formatting so it would look unprofessional when printed." Each item on his list felt like a physical blow. Months of self-doubt and damaged confidence suddenly had very specific causes, very deliberate origins. "How?" I asked when he finished. "How did you access my files?" Derek looked ashamed. "I watched you type your password, and when that didn't work anymore, I installed remote access software when you were at lunch." "That's illegal," Susan said flatly. "That's unauthorized access to company computer systems." "I know," Derek said miserably. "I know it was wrong. All of it." I sat back in my chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he had done and by the systematic, calculated nature of it all. This hadn't been impulsive sabotage driven by momentary jealousy. This had been a months-long campaign designed to undermine everything I had worked to build. "There's something else," Derek said quietly, and my heart sank. "What else?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. My voice came out steadier than I felt. Derek shifted uncomfortably in his chair, glancing between the 3 of us before focusing on his hands. "The Hendricks project. The big one you've been working on for the past month." My blood ran cold. The Hendricks project was my most important assignment, a potential account worth over $2 million to the company. I had been putting in extra hours, refining every detail, making sure it was absolutely perfect for next week's presentation. "What did you do to it?" I asked slowly. "I haven't done anything yet," Derek said quickly. "But I had planned to. Tonight, actually. I was going to access your files after hours and make changes to the financial projections and the timeline." Susan leaned forward, her pen clicking against her notepad. "You were planning to sabotage a $2 million presentation the night before it was due? I thought if it was big enough, if the mistake was serious enough, they might reassign the account to me," Derek said, his voice cracking. I convinced myself that I could fix whatever problems arose and prove I was better suited for major clients. Janet made a disgusted sound. "You were willing to risk the entire account just to make yourself look better? What if the client walked away completely?" "I wasn't thinking clearly," Derek said miserably. "I was so focused on trying to prove myself that I lost sight of everything else. The company, the team, what it would mean for everyone." I stared at him, trying to process the scope of what he had planned. "You would have destroyed months of work. Not just mine, but the entire team's research, the market analysis Janet helped with, everything. I know, he whispered. I hate myself for even thinking about it. Thinking about it? Janet's voice rose. You said you had planned to do it tonight. That's more than just thinking. Derek nodded, tears starting to form in his eyes. You're right. I had already figured out exactly what I was going to change. I had the timeline mapped out for when I would access your computer. I even practiced the modifications on dummy files. The methodical nature of his planning sent chills down my spine. This wasn't a moment of weakness or a split-second bad decision. This was premeditated sabotage that could have cost me my career and the company a major client. Why are you telling us this now? I asked. What stopped you? Derek wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. This morning, when I saw how devastated you looked after the Miller meeting, I realized what I was really doing to you. And then, when I overheard you talking to Janet about maybe looking for another job, I knew I had gone too far. You were listening to our private conversation? Janet demanded. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, Derek said quickly. I came to find you to apologize, and I heard you talking in the break room. When I heard you say that maybe you weren't cut out for this job, I realized I was destroying someone who didn't deserve it. I felt Janet's anger radiating from across the table, but I was too emotionally drained to feel the same intensity. Instead, I felt empty, hollow, like something fundamental had been carved out of me. Derek, Susan said, her voice taking on an official tone. You understand that what you've described constitutes multiple violations of company policy, potential criminal activity, and grounds for immediate termination. Yes, he said quietly. I understand. More than that, I said, finding my voice again. You've made me question everything about myself. Do you understand that? For months, I thought I was losing my touch, that I wasn't good enough for this job. I started second-guessing every decision, every presentation, every email I sent. Derek looked up at me, his face crumpled with guilt. I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt your confidence. I thought I was just affecting individual projects. How could you think that? Janet interjected. How could you systematically sabotage someone's work and think it wouldn't affect them personally? I don't know, Derek admitted. I think I tried not to think about it. I focused on the technical aspects, the specific changes I was making, instead of the human impact. Susan made another note, then looked up at Derek with a stern expression. What you're describing suggests a pattern of deliberate harassment and sabotage spanning several months. Even if we accept that you're genuinely remorseful now, the damage has been extensive. I know, Derek said. I want to make it right somehow, but I don't know how. You can start by giving us complete access to your computer and any files related to this, Susan said. We need to verify everything you've told us and make sure there aren't additional instances we don't know about. Derek nodded immediately. Of course, anything you need. I watched this exchange feeling strangely detached. Part of me was relieved to finally understand what had been happening, but another part was struggling with a new realization. Derek, I said slowly, if you hadn't confessed today, would you have gone through with sabotaging the Hendricks presentation tonight? He was quiet for a long moment, and in that silence, I saw the answer I was dreading. Derek's silence stretched on, and I could see the truth written across his face. The weight of that realization hit me like a physical blow. You would have, I said, not really a question anymore. Even after months of watching me struggle, even after hearing me say I wasn't cut out for this job, You would have sabotaged the biggest presentation of my career? I don't know, Derek said weakly. Maybe. I was so caught up in the routine of it, the habit. The habit, I repeated, letting the words hang in the air. Destroying my work had become a habit for you. Susan cleared her throat. Derek, I need you to understand that this confession, while appreciated, doesn't change the severity of what you've done. We're going to need to involve our IT security team to do a full audit of your access logs. And legal, Janet added firmly. This isn't just an HR matter anymore. Derek's face went pale. Legal? You accessed another employee's computer without authorization, Susan explained. You deliberately modified work documents. Depending on how we proceed, this could involve law enforcement. I watched Derek process this, seeing the full reality of his actions finally sinking in. For months, I had been the one living with consequences while he went about his normal routine. Now, the tables were turning. There's something else I need to know, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. The Morrison contract that fell through last month, was that you too? Derek nodded miserably. I changed some of the pricing figures in your final proposal. Just small amounts, but enough to make us look inconsistent compared to our earlier discussions. Janet made a disgusted sound. Do you have any idea how much revenue we lost on that contract? And the Henderson project timeline that got completely messed up? I continued. I modified the dates in your project management file, Derek admitted. I changed the milestone deadlines so they didn't align with what you'd promised the client. Each confession felt like another piece of a puzzle clicking into place, but instead of relief, I felt a growing sense of violation. Every professional frustration, every moment of self-doubt, every time I'd questioned my own competence had been manufactured by someone I'd considered a colleague. Susan was writing furiously now. Derek, I'm going to need you to provide a complete list of every instance where you accessed or modified work that wasn't yours. Every file, every document, every system entry. I'll try to remember everything, Derek said. You don't get to try, Janet said sharply. You're going to sit down and document every single thing you did, when you did it, and what files you affected. Because right now, we have no idea how much of our work product has been compromised. The full scope of the situation was beginning to dawn on me. This wasn't just about my presentations or my confidence. Derek's sabotage had potentially affected client relationships, company revenue, and project timelines across multiple accounts. Susan, I said slowly, if Derek was changing my work, how do we know what else might have been affected? How do we know which versions of documents are accurate? Susan looked up from her notes, and I could see the same realization crossing her face. We're going to need to do a comprehensive review of every project you've worked on in the past 6 months, maybe longer. That's going to take weeks, I said. It's going to take however long it takes, Janet replied, because we need to make sure we haven't delivered compromised work to any of our other clients. Derek seemed to shrink further into his chair. I never thought about it affecting other projects. You never thought about a lot of things, I said, and for the first time since this meeting started, I felt a flicker of anger breaking through the numbness. You never thought about how it would affect me, how it would affect our clients, how it would affect the company? What exactly did you think about? Derek looked up at me, his eyes red-rimmed. I thought about proving that I deserved the promotion more than you did. The simple honesty of that statement hit harder than all his apologies combined. This hadn't been some abstract professional rivalry or momentary lapse in judgment. Derek had systematically undermined my work because he believed he deserved my position more than I did. And now? I asked. Derek was quiet for a long moment. Now I realize I never deserved it at all. Susan closed her notebook and looked around the table. Derek, you're suspended effective immediately pending a full investigation. I need you to surrender your access cards and company equipment before you leave today. What happens next? Derek asked quietly. That depends on what our investigation finds and what legal counsel advises, Susan replied. But I think you should prepare for the possibility that your employment here is over. Derek nodded slowly, then looked directly at me. Is there anything I can do to help fix what I've broken? I stared at him, thinking about all the nights I'd stayed late trying to figure out what was wrong with my presentations, all the times I'd questioned my own abilities, all the opportunities that might have been lost because of his interference. There's something else, I said suddenly, a new thought occurring to me. The Yamamoto account that I supposedly messed up so badly, they threatened to leave us. That was right before my performance review, wasn't it? Derek's expression confirmed my suspicion before he even spoke. Yes, Derek whispered, his voice barely audible. That was me too. The room fell silent except for the hum of the air conditioning. I felt something cold settle in my stomach as the full scope of what he'd done began to crystallize. The Yamamoto presentation? I said slowly, working through the memory. The slides kept freezing during the video call, and then when I finally got it working, half the graphics were corrupted. Derek nodded miserably. They almost fired me over that, I continued, my voice getting stronger as the anger finally broke through. Janet, you remember that meeting? You said my performance had been inconsistent, that maybe I wasn't ready for the level of responsibility I'd been given. Janet's face had gone pale. The review I put in your file, the one that affected your bonus structure. And probably my chances at the senior account manager position that opened up 3 months later, I added. Susan was taking notes furiously. Derek, I need you to walk us through every single incident, every presentation, every document, every time you accessed her computer, everything. Derek ran his hands through his hair. I don't know if I can remember them all. It's been going on for almost 8 months. 8 months? The words came out sharper than I intended. This started before the promotion was even announced? It started when I heard rumors that you were being considered for advancement, Derek admitted. I thought if I could just make your work look a little sloppy, management would notice that I was more reliable. I stared at him, trying to process the calculated nature of what he'd done. This wasn't a moment of weakness or a single bad decision. This was a sustained campaign designed to destroy my professional reputation. The Morrison contract, I said, another piece falling into place. The one where the client said there were inconsistencies in the pricing spreadsheet? I changed some of the formulas, Derek said quietly. We almost lost that account. I had to work 3 weekends in a row to rebuild their trust. I turned to Janet. And you made me attend those time management seminars because you said I was missing too many details. Janet looked like she wanted to disappear into her chair. We'll need to revisit all of those performance evaluations. This goes way beyond performance evaluations, Susan said, her voice tight with controlled anger. Derek, do you understand that what you've done could constitute corporate sabotage? That there could be legal ramifications? Derek's head snapped up. Legal ramifications? You deliberately compromised client presentations and contracts, Susan continued. You damaged both the company's relationships and an employee's career through fraudulent means. Yes, there could absolutely be legal ramifications. The conference room fell silent again. I found myself studying Derek's face, trying to reconcile the colleague I'd worked alongside for years with the person who had systematically tried to destroy my career. "There's something I need to know," I said finally. "Was any of it real? Any of the friendship, the collaboration, the times you offered to help me with projects?" Derek looked up at me with something that might have been shame. "Some of it was real. Before all this started, I did consider us friends. I respected your work. But not enough to compete with me honestly." "No," he said quietly. "Not enough for that." Susan closed her notebook with a sharp snap. "Derek, I need that list of every incident you can remember on my desk by end of business today, along with your access cards and laptop. Security will escort you out after you've gathered your personal belongings." As if summoned by her words, there was a knock on the conference room door. Through the glass, I could see 2 security guards waiting in the hallway. Derek stood slowly, the weight of his actions finally seeming to hit him fully. As he moved toward the door, he paused and looked back at me one more time. "For what it's worth," he said, "I know you're going to do great things here." You always were the better choice for that promotion. I wanted to feel vindicated by his admission, but instead, I just felt exhausted. "I wish you'd realize that before you tried to tear me down to build yourself up." He nodded and left with the security guards, leaving the 3 of us in the suddenly quiet conference room. Janet cleared her throat. "Sarah, I owe you a significant apology. Not just for the performance evaluations, but for not catching this sooner. I should have investigated more thoroughly when these issues started occurring." "How could you have known?" I asked, though part of me was still processing the fact that months of self-doubt and extra work had been completely unnecessary. "That's exactly the point," Susan interjected. "There were patterns we should have noticed. Technical problems that only affected one person, issues that seemed to resolve themselves mysteriously, the timing of when things went wrong." She turned to Janet. "We need to implement better monitoring systems and create clearer protocols for reporting suspected sabotage." Janet was already taking notes. "Absolutely. And Sarah, I want you to know that we'll be reviewing all of your work from the past year with fresh eyes. I have a feeling your performance ratings are going to look very different." The irony wasn't lost on me that Derek's sabotage had actually led to me working harder and producing even better results than I might have otherwise. Every time something went wrong, I doubled down, put in extra hours, and found ways to exceed expectations to compensate for what I thought were my own shortcomings. "There's also the matter of that promotion," Susan said. "The position Derek was so worried about losing to you, it's still open, and after seeing how you've handled this entire situation, I think we have our answer about who deserves it." I felt a mix of emotions wash over me. Relief, certainly. Validation. But also a strange sadness for the colleague I'd thought I knew, and anger at the months of unnecessary stress and self-doubt. "I'd like some time to process all of this before we talk about next steps," I said. "This has been a lot to take in." "Of course," Susan said. "Take the rest of the day. We'll schedule a follow-up meeting tomorrow to discuss your new role and how we move forward." As I walked back to my desk to gather my things, I thought about all the late nights I'd spent wondering what was wrong with me, all the times I'd questioned my own competence. Derek's betrayal stung, but knowing the truth felt like finally being able to breathe again. I pulled out my phone and started typing a text to my sister, then stopped. This story felt too big, too important to share over text. Some conversations needed to happen face to face, and this was definitely one of them. She'd been right to encourage me to trust my instincts and speak up, and I couldn't wait to tell her how it had all unfolded. For the first time in months, I left the office at 5 o'clock sharp, my head held high and my confidence finally restored.